So we'll just give it a minute before we get started and let everyone get settled with their drink tonight. If you want, if you can hear me by now, if you want to put in the chat what you're drinking with us tonight, we'd love to know. All right,
I
well,
have my glass of Sauvignon Blanc, which is not very craft, I have to admit. I have some craft beer from Two Brothers in the drawer that I opted out of tonight, and some craft kombucha. But
Ooh,
yeah,
that sounds good. I've tried that once. I haven't quite gotten into it quite yet, but I'm gonna have to give it some time.
Miss Gall is drinking water. Fine choice. Did you know that there is a trend of craft water?
What?
We were just talking about that during our practice session, weren't we,
Yeah.
Sam? We're like, there's craft water, isn't there? It's like a thing now. So anyway, so thank you for joining us tonight for Meaning Through Food. I'm Jamie, the Adult Program Coordinator at the Deerfield Public Library, and I am delighted to welcome our very own Deerfield librarian, Sam Rosen, who will be interviewing author Eve Turow-Paul tonight. Eve is the author of Hungry and is the founder and executive director of the Food for Climate League, a nonprofit that's creating an exciting, sustainable food and climate narrative. If you have a question, you've already seen the chat, but you can put those in the chat at the bottom of the screen. We will get to those near the end of the program. And this program actually will be recorded. So if you missed something tonight, I'll be sending that out either tomorrow or Friday. So look forward to that. Okay. And if we don't have any urgent questions right now, I'm going to turn it over to Sam and to Eve. Oh, it looks like you're muted, Sam.
It would be better if you guys can hear me. Hi, everyone. So thank you, Jamie, for that lovely introduction. So I'm Sam Rosen, and if you've ever used the chat feature or called the library, chances are you're talking to the guy who's on the other end. So I am very honored right now to participate in this wonderful event and get to interview my good friend Eve Turow-Paul. I have the book right here, Hungry, and I got to read it about a year ago, right when the pandemic started, and I think it was a little bit of perfect timing because I think it was a really good way to take my mind off things a little bit. So I just love the opportunity that I get to ask Eve questions and expand my knowledge as well as the audience's knowledge. So thank you, Eve, for coming. And are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Oh,
Sam.
all right, let's do this.
Sam
Let's get
was
this.
one of my first readers outside of the family. So it's really great that almost a year later we get to do this. I'm excited, and thank you to everyone who's here and spending your evening with us. I did see that there are a couple things in the chat saying that there's an echo. If anyone else is having any problems with the audio, just chime in. But anyway, yeah, I'm ready to go, Sam.
All righty, well, I'm ready to ask questions. So first, you open Hungry by profiling the growing craft beer scene in Mexico. So why did you choose this as the opening, and how is craft beer an example of the themes you explore in the rest of the book?
Yeah, so I ended up opening the book with this experience of looking at a menu while I was on vacation in Mexico, when I was choosing a beer, thinking that I was going to flip it over and see, 2 or 3 options of Modelo or Corona. And instead there were something like 74 different options of craft beers. Each one had been brewed in the country of Mexico. Each one had its own state on it. And I was just floored. And for me, it really is a great example of the obsession with food and how it has proliferated globally. And I think that there's a lot of people who assume that these trends are really only applicable to white Westerners, to people who are wealthy. And the reality is that foodieism, an obsession with food, an appreciation for craft foods, has really imbued itself into nearly every single facet of culture around the world. I've seen, I've gone to craft beer spots in Bangkok and in Vietnam and in Mexico. And so to me, it was just a really great example of just how international this has become, and that it's no longer niche. This appreciation for food has gone mainstream. And then you also need to ask, well, okay, why are people spending the money on it, right? If you can get a beer for $1 or $2 US, why are people spending the $7 US in Mexico on this beer? And that's kind of the question that Hungry explores.
Oh, awesome. 74 options is just way too much for me. I mean, how do you even choose a number?
I asked the waiter.
Yeah, that's
like,
that's
"Oh,
what
here."
I would have probably done too.
Yeah.
So moving on, so when I was reading through your book, I was noticing a connection between mental health and food trends. And well, before reading your book, I would have never thought that those two paths would have ever intersected. And so I was very interested to see how, by the end of the book, how you intersected those two themes. So my next question is, considering the fact that anxiety and loneliness are probably even more pervasive now than when you were writing the book, how do you expect these mental health issues will impact food and lifestyle trends?
Yes, and so everyone else has background. Sam has experience in social work, and that was his previous career. So he and I have talked a lot about this particular aspect. But yeah, so when I first started to do research into the why behind food trends, this was way back, probably over a decade ago. I wasn't expecting it to take me to the fact that millennials and Gen Zers have the highest rates of anxiety, depression, loneliness, and stress of all generations. But that's where it took me. Because really, when I was digging into the why people are spending so much of their discretionary time and income on things like bowls of ramen or avocado toast or cold brew coffee, a lot of the time it was not rational. So I really knew that there was kind of a deeper emotional play here. And over the last year, right, a lot of the issues that I write about in the book, such as depression, such as stress, anxiety, loneliness, they've just been completely exacerbated. Now we're about a year into the pandemic. I mean, I don't know about you, but like that plus winter time is just like, it's so hard.
Oh yeah, it's bad.
It's so hard. And it is showing up in food trends. And, it's anxiety is exhibiting itself right off the bat in just hoarding, right? People saying, okay, I need to get control. I want to control my anxiety in some way by feeling like I can have control over my surroundings. I'm going to buy every single roll of toilet paper there is in the store until there were rules put up against that. But there's other aspects of anxiety mitigation that are showing up in people wanting to take on kind of DIY home projects like sourdough bread, learning to bake sourdough, kind of getting their hands dirty, doing something that's slow, that's a bit meditative, as a way to mitigate their anxiety. A lot of people now are really into immune boosting foods, and I'm going to assume that that is only going to gain in traction in this coming year because, right, we all want to feel like we have authority over our own health and well-being. And if we can do that by having some like supercharged kale smoothie, like if you have access to it and can afford it, there's going to be very few people who say no to that. And then in terms of community, I think this is TikTok. Like, you really think about like, why has TikTok become such a thing? Obviously, I think like the more obvious things are like virtual dinner parties, like these kind of virtual substitutes for what we used to do in person. But ultimately, food has always been a conduit for connection for human beings. And over the last decade, food has played that role to an even stronger degree in terms of food culture, because it became the place where we could sit down with friends, with family, with strangers, and at a shared table sometimes with shared plates, and really kind of get away from our screens. It was really one of the only places where we got to have that eye-to-eye contact and intimacy. I think the only other common place is gyms, boutique gyms. And now we're missing this. I actually was just talking to an editor today of a magazine, and I'm going to be writing a piece on why restaurant culture is going to be even more important as we come out of this pandemic than it was before, because we need that connection for our own well-being. And in the book, I ended up exploring a lot about how our relationships on social media are actually hindering our in-person relationships, taking our attention away from the opportunity to actually engage one-on-one with eye contact, with a shared experience. I get all the way into like the physiological implications of that. And while I am happy to be able to do events such as this, I really wish I was sitting in a room with all of you and sharing some hors d'oeuvres and catching up and meeting new people. And ultimately, that kind of in-person experience would be more beneficial for me emotionally and physiologically. So I am excited to see the return of restaurant culture, the way people are able to really combat this long-term isolation by gathering around a table with some really delicious things to eat.
Oh, most definitely. I couldn't have said it any better. Yeah, that's very interesting point you made there. But kind of to add to that question, how is COVID already impacting how and what we eat?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that it is, those desires for anxiety, those desires for community are showing up in a really strong way, as well as a desire for purpose. So what I've been spending my time on since I wrote the book is my nonprofit, which is called Food for Climate League. And we are working with food and hospitality and tech companies to democratize sustainable eating. And in March of last year, we were talking to our one of our funders, and he was basically like, "You're not going to get any money this year. Like, no one's going to care about sustainability," assuming that we would all be so focused on our immediate health needs that the larger global crisis would kind of go down the scale, right, of people's like main concerns. And the opposite has been true. So we're collecting data as an organization. Me, just as this kind of trends obsessed person, been paying attention to it. But actually interest in and spending on climate smart foods and climate smart goods, including right, like t-shirts, pants, fashion, makeup, all of that stuff has gone up this year. And I really do think that it's people are trying to fulfill some of their most basic human needs through their food and lifestyle choices. And during this year, we've had so few outlets to create that sense of control in our lives, to create that sense of belonging, to create that sense of meaning and purpose. I think the other way this has really shown up is time in nature. People trying to start their own gardens, right? There was like a run on baby chicks at the start of the pandemic. That was kind of like a control thing and a purpose thing, right? Like people wanted their own food sources that they again had autonomy over, or felt that they did. But the other part of it is just like, it's really beautiful to watch a chicken grow, or to watch any living thing, or to care for a living thing, to cultivate a garden, to plant a seed. It makes you feel like that you're part of just something that's much bigger, and it can put this pandemic into perspective, right? This is a blip in human history. It'll be, hopefully a blip in our lives. The sacrifice is not as big as other crises that human beings have gone through before, right? We just need to basically be lonely and stay inside and Netflix and binge. And yes, recuperate lost lives and recuperate from lost jobs, but still it's, the gravity of it is, for many people, we can cope, and one of our coping mechanisms is through food culture.
Yeah, definitely. I know that being inside can definitely make you kind of lethargic. So being outside and having these outdoor spaces are essential, even if you're doing it even if you're risking a little bit. You just wear your mask and stay 6 feet away. But for me, forest preserves really saved me this summer and fall.
Yeah.
I loved going there, and it was kind of just an escape from just being cramped inside,
Yeah.
And so moving on, I noticed you were talking about food trends, and you make a lot of different. You put a lot of different examples of food trends in your book. one of them being mukbang. And that one really is just so interesting to me. From what I remember is that mukbang is someone making food and eating food over the internet. And so people can watch and kind of participate in eating with the person on the computer. So you're not technically dining alone, but you're like physically alone, but like you still have like this shared community. And other examples are just like snacking as well. So can you talk through what you found around why millennials and now Gen Zers are the ultimate snackers?
Okay, well, I'm gonna go back to mukbang for a
Oh
second,
yeah,
and
please
then
do. Yes,
I'll
then
touch
go
on
to snack.
snacking. Um, so I think this was my favorite interview for the book, maybe, I don't know. But I had the chance to go to South Korea and interview this woman who used to live stream herself having dinner every night, and she did it for many years. And she is just one example, one player in this trend called mukbang, which means uh, eating broadcast in Korean. And some of these broadcast jockeys make millions of dollars every year from their followers who send them money directly, and also from ads. So views on their videos, they get that ad revenue in the same way that it works on YouTube. Most mukbang is on a different website called Africa TV. Um, but it was one of these trends that just I found to be very perplexing. It's like something like 25% of South Koreans have watched mukbang. It's usually somebody who's eating a copious amount of food. There's often like an ASMR aspect to it. So they put the microphone really close to their mouth so you can hear them slurp or bite or chew. I just didn't understand it. And I knew that this was something that was starting to gain steam in China, but also here in the US and Canada. You spell it Mukbang. Some people love mukbang. Some people are completely horrified by mukbang. But I had the chance to go out to the suburbs of Seoul and interview this young woman and watch her as she prepared for her mukbang live stream that evening. And what I ended up learning from her is that while many people end up tuning into the live stream to kind of watch her eat whatever it's going to be, like 18 hamburgers or like or like 12 packages of ramen, it's crazy to watch someone devour this. The eating is about an hour, and then there's 2 hours of conversation afterwards. And she told me that she has about 200 people who have consistently watched her every single night. Most of them eat their own dinner while watching. Sometimes she'll tell them what she's going to eat ahead of time so they can plan to have the same meal, probably in a smaller quantity. And when I asked her if she would ever stop, she looked at me like horrified. And she was like, "These people are my family." And what I ended up learning once I dug deeper is that the rise of mukbang correlates with the rise of number of South Koreans who are living alone and rising rates of loneliness. And so to me, it became this really kind of like a mirrored example of what's happened as well in the West, where we have influencer culture, right? Where we're following people online, whether that's going to be Kim Kardashian or the founder of the Whole30 diet. We are also experiencing a loneliness epidemic. I guess it is a pandemic at this point because it is around the world. And people are using influencers, live streams, people who they can connect with online, though they may be strangers, as really a substitute sometimes for family, sometimes for friends. And one of the projects that I undertook for Hungry was actually an original study. So I've been doing my work as a journalist for over 10 years, identifying a lot of these themes. And I use what research exists, but I'd gotten to a point where I was like, okay, I have these theories. I want to see if this plays out in a quantified setting. And I ended up running a study in partnership with Data Essential, who's a market research firm here in Chicago. And we surveyed 1,100 people across the United States. And one of the most interesting findings was that people who have the most followers on social media, at least of our study population, were also the most likely to say that if they wanted to go on a trip, they wouldn't be able to find someone to go with them. they rated higher on our loneliness scales than the general population. And it was just really interesting to be able to quantify the impact of social media in being this kind of facade of connection in some ways. And in the book, I go into also all the reasons why that is, how this all functions, how social media is taking your attention away from a lot of the relationships that you should be paying attention to. The realities during the pandemic obviously are slightly different, but anyway, so that's mukbang for people who were curious about it. Snacking is a totally different kind of realm. So the way that I structured the book, I'm going to kind of back up a little bit. I structured the book based on our core human needs. So the first section is about our desire for control and safety. The middle section is about our desire for community and belonging, which is where the mukbang chapter is. And the third is about our sense of our desire for purpose and meaning in life. And I take each chapter and investigate a food trend and look at how that food trend is helping us fulfill one of those more core basic needs. And all of us embody these needs. I landed on them after doing kind of an in-depth analysis of theories from psychologists and sociologists and religious philosophers. And it was really interesting actually to like put them all on top of each other and see that there were these three kind of bucket overlaps. And it's now how I just see the world. But snacking is in the control section. And the way that I ended up really landing on snacking as a theme that I wanted to tackle was actually, I found myself at the snack conference, SNAC, which of course is a bunch of snack companies who gather together. It was like the craziest conference to go to too, because it was like all the food was just a table of like bags of chips and pretzels and fried chickpeas and whatever.
I would gain so much weight there.
Yeah,
Just saying.
luckily it was like 24 hours at the snack conference. But the question that I kept getting from the attendees was like, why do millennials love snacking so much? Because millennials have driven sales of snack foods way up. And what I said at that time, and this was just a guess, I was like, well, do millennials really love snack foods, or do they just not have time to actually eat a meal? And again, this is something that we were able to test with the Hungry study with Data Central, and we were also able to find additional data on this from other research firms. And what we found is actually that the people who snack are the people who spend the most time on their devices. And again, in the book, I walk through, well, why would that be? How does one thing relate to the other? And one of the biggest factors in the way that we live our lives today is our connection to tech. And that is so much the focus of Hungry. And in the book, I walk through the ways that this attachment to technology, in the same way that it kind of gives you this facade of connection, it gives you this like misbelief that you're being more productive with your time, when in reality there are all of these examples that email and text messages and basically all of these different notifications, right, the multiple windows we have open, these are things that cause us to waste more time and become less productive. And so really the snack companies should be thanking Steve Jobs and Jack Dorsey. And snacking during the pandemic too has just become even more popular. And it's so, Sam, I've talked to your partner about this, but at the beginning of the pandemic, right, he started working even longer hours. And I know so many people who were in that position. And so it's like the snack food industry is benefiting, of course, from anxiety, a desire for comfort, right? You just want to like scarf a bag of Doritos or whatever your vice of choice is. But also the fact that like a lot of people don't have time to get up in the middle of the day now and go make themselves lunch, right? They can't just go to the cafeteria. And so the snack food industry is benefiting from that. But at the end of the day, like if you read anything about the rise of snack foods or the fact that millennials are too lazy to eat a bowl of cereal, just question why that is, because at the end of the day, to me, the rise of snacking is correlated with the rise of burnout, the rise of stress, of people thinking that they don't have enough time in the day to accomplish the things that they want to do.
Oh, absolutely, definitely. And I've also noticed how social media can also be used as an escape to be where you are right now in the present. And I found that it's a good use to like fill awkward silences. So like if you're like in a social setting, like you just pull out your phone and like
Yeah.
swipe through Instagram. It's something to like kind of fill the void of
Yeah.
the silence. And um, yeah,
There are some great like viral videos now that people have put together about that, like what happens when you look down, like what are you missing out on? And there's like a few that say like you could be missing out on meeting the love of your life, right? Like those kinds of um instantaneous and random connections that can be made. They're less, they were, now they're right non-existent, which is something that I think all of us are missing, but they were even less common prior to COVID because we are just looking down at our chosen virtual communities. I actually was doing an interview with someone a few weeks ago. I was re-interviewing one of the researchers that I interviewed for the book. And I said something like, well, at least we have FaceTime and Zoom and we can connect with people. And I was like, that's a good thing. And he was like, well, is it? And I was like, well, what do you mean? He was like, well, think about like, what would people be doing if they weren't sitting in front of their computers all day? It's like, would they be outside, maybe actually meeting their neighbors, doing more physical activity, taking on building new skill sets, more practical skill sets with their hands, things that we know facilitate a greater sense of well-being. His point was also that many of these connections that we make online are surface level, and having 15 surface level connections doesn't actually bring us as much value as having one really deep relationship. So I've been kind of toying with that in my head. I will say the flip side to this is I have been running my organization virtually this whole time, and my team and we've been able to forge a really astounding connection with one another. I think it would be a whole lot better if we were there in person, but there's pluses and minuses to this whole experience.
Oh, definitely. There definitely are. And we wouldn't be doing this program if it wasn't
Exactly.
for like our technology. So it's definitely comes with its pros and cons.
Yeah.
And that actually leads me into more social media questions. My next question is, you offer data showing that social media contributes to lower rates of self-esteem, higher rates of perfectionism amongst youth. First, have you noticed this trend more in a certain age group? How has this pandemic changed our relationship to social media? How do you think social media will be used once more and more people get vaccinated and more things start opening up?
Yeah. So the data that's around perfectionism and low self-esteem is primarily about Gen Zers. If any of you know an angsty teen or college age student, give them, gosh, they've grown up during a really rough time. I'm really grateful that there wasn't social media when I was in high school or junior high. And to do this research, I actually went back to my former high school and shadowed a bunch of students for a week. It was honestly, it was really upsetting. I came home every day feeling really sad for these students, but for society in general, because a lot of these kids are putting completely unrealistic expectations on themselves, but also they're living performative lives. I ended up having a conversation with this group of young girls, and I said, what do you do on the weekends? And they were describing their activities, and then they said, well, and then whatever, we go to the beach, we drive around, we blah 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 blah. Just like, and then we choose to eat something someplace pretty. And I was like, what do you mean? She was like, well, we need to do something that's Insta worthy, saying it needs to be worthy of Instagram. I was like, you plan your weekend activity based on what will look good on Instagram? And she was like, yes. She didn't think there was anything weird about that. But instead of thinking about like what was going to be fun, what she would like to do with her time, right? Instead, she was vying for likes, upvotes from oftentimes people who she doesn't even really know. It was also really interesting to talk to these young people about this topic because they're in many ways they're aware, but they like can't escape this like cycle that they're caught in, that those around them are expecting them to participate in. I have no idea what the impact of social media has been on people's self-esteem over the last year. There was something really, really interesting that happened this year, though, which is that by and large, prior to the pandemic, social media has been used as a place to gloat. Yes, to forge, connections, find community. Again, like I'm not saying that there's everything is wrong with social media, but when you post something, I'm thinking specifically of Instagram. When you post something on Instagram, like I encourage everyone on this call, like go through your feed starting, go skip 2020, but go prior to 2020 and think about why were you posting that picture? What were you trying to say? What were you trying to get people to think? And the first person who really turned me on to this was Anthony Bourdain. I had the chance to interview him for my first book. And he was talking to me about this like icky feeling that he had, knowing that when he posted about some meal that he was eating, that what he really was doing was bragging and saying like, hey, you person sitting on your couch in your underpants eating a bowl of cereal, I'm eating this, braised leg of rabbit with a raspberry coulis, be jealous. And what's been really interesting over the last year is that like, what have we had to post that was, worthy of other people's jealousy? Like people just haven't been able to use social media in that way. And so there's actually been a really beautiful thing that happened in 2020, which is that people started to use social media to help each other. They were giving each other tips and tricks. It was like, what do I do with my carrot tops? How do I cook dried beans? Like, how do I survive this moment? And I think that I'm hoping that aspect of social media continues, because that's really where you do get that community support. It is not the same thing again as like actually having people in your town who are offering that support, but you can feel less alone. You can feel like people have your back, that you're able to learn from people. You're also you're able to offer your expertise, which is a really big part of self-esteem building. So I don't know, I'm kind of hopeful that those rates of perfectionism and self-doubt are going to be decreasing as we come out of the pandemic. So again, it's not about that social media in and of itself is the problem, it's how we use it. And I think that we have been forced to use it differently over the last year.
Oh, definitely. And you bring up an interesting point about like the likes, and we're getting likes from people we don't know, but we just want a high number, because I think that social media does a very good job at playing in our inner psychology of rewarding our neurotransmitters like serotonin. You get a ding of notification, someone liked you, you're excited for a second. So
yeah, I mean, likes are the new candy bars.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, like, I've been in meetings at big food companies where they literally will put up like a picture of, an early human being, and they're like, so we're now going to walk you through all the things that we as Homo sapiens crave. Here is the snack product we have created that is going to trigger all of these different physiological responses to make sure that our customers are satisfied, but also addicted. And tech companies have done the same thing. And so every time that you do get a like, you get a bump of dopamine. And it's like having a drug lever in your pocket. And so it's not the fault of the user that they become hooked into this. And I also, well, yeah, I'll leave it there.
Definitely. So kind of on the same page, you brought up sourdough starters earlier in this conversation. And I noticed that was a huge trend, March 2020, April 2020, when people were looking for things to do inside and everyone was confused about what's what. But can you just explain the obsession with sourdough bread during COVID, and how do trends like these start?
Yeah. Um, so I'm prior to the call starting, we were talking about this, and I shared that my husband's sourdough starter is named Joseph Gordon Levain. I'm curious if anyone does have a fun name for their sourdough starter, put it in the chat, just because I think that's a fun game. People come up with some really creative things to name their sourdough starters. It was really interesting at the beginning of the pandemic because, like, again, so you had people running to the store to collect as much food as possible, but then you had people looking for yeast and flour, and it became really difficult to source those things. And it became also very clear that the reason why people were looking for yeast and for flour was not necessarily because they were concerned about food security. For some people it was, but for most people it would have been easier for them to just like find a loaf of bread, and it would have been more affordable. It would have been easier. But that's not what people wanted. And the most interesting part of the book for me to do research on was the final section, which is about our desire for purpose and meaning in life. And all of us have this question of like, how do you find meaning? How do you feel like you've lived a life that's well lived? And there were just a few different themes, again, that continued to come up. One is a connection to our senses, to our bodies, being in tune with our bodies, but also building a skill, creating something. And I also found that creating something tangible is really, really important for a feeling of self-satisfaction, for a feeling like we are building our skill sets and finding, self-actualization, as Maslow calls it. Another part of finding a sense of meaning is intimacy with nature, because it puts us into the sense that we are just part of a wider ecosystem. We're talking about building community and support. Well, when you start to feel like the trees and the mushrooms and the birds are part of your community, it makes your life take on a new meaning. But one of the questions that I had early on in the book was like, well, okay, why with the rise of technology and social media have we also seen the rise of the DIY movement? Right? Like if you look on Google Trends, you'll see that like one of the most Googled activities in India over the last few years is like how to make goat milk soap. Like, why are people doing this? Right? Like people are Googling like, how do I grow an avocado tree from an avocado pit? Why are adult coloring books a thing? And really what I started to learn is that we as Homo sapiens have all of these innate skills that are no longer being put to use. We can smell 1,000 different scents in soil. We can smell the difference in location after it rains. So we can actually like smell the sap from the trees. So like the rain in Miami will smell different than the rain in Chicago. We have all of these things that are a part of our body that would help us forage and help us survive. We're not using most of that now. We're sitting in front of a screen. Most of the stimulation that we get is through our fingertips, haptic touch. There is very little olfactory stimulation. There's actually even not that much visual stimulation, right? You're like looking at a 2D screen. And having that kind of physical stimulation, but also again, creating something tangible seems to provide us with this sense of self-satisfaction. And this is something that I'm particularly interested in because as a writer, like I answer a lot of emails, I make a lot of PowerPoints, I make a lot of Word documents. I can tell you that once my book was printed out and I could hold it, it was a completely different feeling of accomplishment. And I think that a lot of us who are connected to this digital world in that kind of way are craving that opportunity to make something and then also to share it with others, right? Like feeding other people, like talk about creating meaning. It feels wonderful to nourish others. So I can, I don't know exactly how the sourdough in particular, how that trend started. I think that it is accessible. It's affordable. You can participate in the sourdough trend, no matter what your socioeconomic status, no matter where you are in the world. I think that it takes a lot of patience, a lot of time. But I can tell you that my husband, he teaches elementary school, and when he was going to school, and now during the pandemic as well, he relishes in the opportunity to like feed his starter, and he loves like watching it bubble up. He loves like sticking his hand in the goopy bowl and molding it. Like then he got really into the shapes that he could draw on top. And when he's done, like all he wants to do is feed people with what he's created. He'll even FaceTime people just to show them his beautiful loaf of bread. And he feels really accomplished. And I think that that's a beautiful thing. So, for anyone who's feeling low, find some kind of tangible project you can take on. It doesn't have to be sourdough bread. You could, my brother's building a chess set from twigs. And he's really excited about it. Doesn't matter. Something that's tangible, that's physical.
Oh, definitely. I've been improving my aquarium over the past couple of months, so that's been my kind of like sourdough starter.
Yeah. You're cultivating a life. You're cultivating something.
Definitely. And I get to look at a pretty betta fish, so
yeah.
So backing up, I'm going to ask like a little bit of a broader question about your book. I noticed when reading, and I think I've actually written this in the review of your Goodreads, that I noticed that like you blend in-depth research. So you really like did a lot of really good research with a lot of good statistics and interesting, and you made them very accessible and easy to understand and relate to. But you also talked about like your personal experiences, like your travels to Bangkok and your travels to like that farm, I think somewhere in like California, or
that's in California,
yeah, and other places definitely. And I thought it was a really cool blend, and I just wanted to know if you could explain your educational background and how that influenced your research for this book.
Yeah. I got my undergrad degree from Amherst in psychology. And when I graduated from Amherst, I had written my thesis. So I'd run an experiment and written my thesis. I finished it 2 weeks early, and I wrote 20 pages extra. And I thought, well, this means that I should get my PhD in psych. And I worked in a lab for the summer, actually from Daniel Gilbert's lab at Harvard, and he ended up writing a blurb for the book, which was really nice. But it was interesting, but I also had this moment with one of the PhD students who I was helping out. I was like, okay, you're running this experiment, then what? And he was like, then, you try to get it published in a journal. I was like, okay, and then what? And he was like, then you hope someone finds it one day and reads it. And I was like, wait, what? That's how this works. And it really struck me that in that moment that's not really what I wanted to do, that maybe it wasn't the research that I loved so much, the running of the experiment, but it was explaining the experiment to people. And that's why I had also written a 20-page addendum that was like going into the history of the subject that I had been investigating. But I graduated in 2009 at the peak of the recession, and I couldn't get hired. And I decided that I was going to live on the Argentine peso. I don't really understand why exactly I chose Buenos Aires. I had been lucky enough to study abroad in Spain. I had spent some time in Costa Rica in high school doing a volunteer project there. I think I just wanted to explore a different Spanish-speaking culture. And it turned out that learning the history of Argentina was really complicated. And one of the best routes that I discovered was through food culture. And I got an internship writing for an expat newspaper, and I started covering food because it's religion, it's economics, it's agriculture, it's everything. And it was a way for me to continue my liberal arts education, and I just became really obsessed with food culture as a lens for human behavior. And then, fast forward many years, I got my graduate degree in creative nonfiction writing, which is basically journalism without the deadlines. For anyone curious, at the New School in New York City. And it was just a great opportunity to explore what was of interest to me. But it was also the place where I had the time to sit back and say, like, I'm pretty broke. I'm living in one of the most expensive cities in America. it's still, you know, it was 2010, 2011, like the people around me were still suffering economically. But anytime that there was a break in class, people were pulling out their phones and talking about what they had eaten that night or that weekend, things that they had made, the restaurants they'd gone to. And I was choosing to spend my money on dinner or really fancy, you know, cheese from Whole Foods and opting to, you know, do my own laundry. In New York, you can send your laundry out and have someone else wash it and fold it. Well, I wasn't doing that. I decided not to buy new clothes. I decided some nights not to take taxi cabs, not to go to the movies. I was going to use my budget instead on really great ingredients, right? Like I went out and got soft shell crab that I cooked for myself. Like, and then the question was like, why am I doing this? So I think, you know, the hungry for me was just an opportunity um, to really kind of lean into that more academic side of my interests in psychology, my obsession with human behavior, and then also try to turn it into something that people could relate to and understand. Um, and it's very, very stats heavy. The main target audience initially really was people in the hospitality and food industries. And it is resonating with that audience, but it's finding wider readership now, which I'm really happy about.
Oh, definitely. And so what would you say your favorite interview was of the book? I know it's probably a hard thing to answer, but
It is. You know, I've already talked about mukbang. That was one of my favorites. I think the other one was the farm in Sonoma. I ended up visiting a farm just north of San Francisco, where there are two individuals who are Gen Xers who had been in the tech scene, the biotech scene, and sight unseen bought a farm in Sonoma with no farming experience. And you know, again, kind of going back to that like sense of purpose and connection to nature, I had a transformative experience on their farm. And for the first time, you know, holding a baby piglet, having a goat jump onto my lap and wanting to be petted, listening to a hive of bees. And you know, it was also in talking to these individuals about their life decisions and like how did they decide to spend all of their savings on this, and decide to jump into this. And it really was this yearning. It was almost like there was something visceral that was guiding that decision rather than something rational. And it just opened up my eyes. It really shifted my perspective. And don't be surprised if in, you know, 15, 20 years you find me on a farm somewhere. That's I think where a lot of us are meant to be, at least
kind of similar to where your
after.
wedding was, right?
Yes, yeah, we got married on a farm. But that was also, you know, it was like, well, we're gonna spend money on a venue, may as well support some small farmers. So yeah.
Awesome. Speaking of farming, I don't know if you watched John Oliver at all, but his new season came out not yesterday, but Sunday, and it was all about future pandemics and
Great.
it was really scary. But one part of it was about factory farming, in particular how it could be like a breeding ground for viruses to spread, and of course that scared the living bejesus out of me. But I was just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit over the future implications on factory farming over food trends.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. And then I realize we have 10 minutes left. So if people do want to start adding questions to the chat, feel free and we can address those after. But it's a really good question. So during the last year, we've seen the rise of plant-based eating. So whether that's Beyond Burger or people who are just buying more lentils and beans and figuring out what to do with that instead of getting their sirloin steak and hamburgers. There are a lot of reasons why we've seen the rise of plant-based, but I've had a number of conversations with individuals who said, you know, when I saw these factory farm workers that were highlighted on the news, it was the first time I stopped to think about how my meat gets to me. And 98% of Americans do not know a farmer. And we buy our meat broken down, wrapped in saran wrap on some styrofoam. And we are not forced to think about the fact that A, we are eating something that was once alive, but also the human energy, the natural energy that it takes to get that piece of meat to your plate. And so I was hearing from friends who were like, I never thought about the fact that there are people who break down the animal. That it's not just the animals in many of these factory farming situations who are treated inhumanely. It is also people who are treated inhumanely, who look like the cattle that are in these CAFOs. And I think for a lot of people, it was just this moment of facing the reality of the system that we all, not all, but many of us play into. And I, what John Oliver is talking about, like, it's true. And you can read about that reality as well in the book Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, right? He talks about the fact that agriculture like was the start of the end of the human race, because we're not supposed to live in close proximity to livestock. This is not to say that animals should play no role in our food system. I believe that they do. I believe that having animals is a part of a healthy ecosystem, but living right next to them, having animals live in these situations where they too are spreading disease more easily amongst one another. This is just a reality that we're going to have to start to contend with. We created this way of living. We created this food system. And this is like another thing I keep hearing from people is like, well, the traditional way of eating is with a steak in it. It's like, no, okay, that's like very new in the realm of human history. There's nothing traditional about that way of eating. That's just what you know, and maybe what your grandparents know, but go back one more generation, that's not how they were eating. And so I think that people are starting to reckon with that. And it hasn't been enough to look at the rising rates of diabetes and heart disease and cancers, and look at, well, what we're eating has to do with this, which we all know at this point. That hasn't been enough to shift behavior, but for whatever reason, what's going on factory farms and shining a light on that does seem to be shifting people's attitudes. So I'll be very intrigued to see what exactly happens in the years to come.
Oh, definitely, me too. And I hope that we find a better solution than what we're doing right now. And a lot of like factory farms it could go hand in hand with like the climate crisis that we're going through as well.
There are many reasons why we should not be eating animals in the quantities that we are eating.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, definitely. That definitely goes hand in hand. And this is actually, unfortunately, going to be my last question, because we were having such a fun time talking and conversing that, like, where did the time go? But you ended the book by focusing on the climate crisis and how our relationship to food and nature is one of the most important levers we have for climate action. Why did you decide to conclude this book on that topic?
Yeah, so I've been working for so many years now on food trends and helping companies understand the why behind these food trends. And the more that I, dug into this line of work, the more I was also coming face to face with these realities of the role of our food system on the climate crisis, and also the potential role of our food system to fix the climate crisis, to be the solution for it. And honestly, like I was also doing this research on meaning in life. And I was like, well, what's the point of me doing this research on food trends if the only human need that'll be driving food trends in the near future will be our need to survive? It's not going to be the need for community and the need for purpose, like if we can't get enough food. And that reality is it's a serious possibility. It's not something that people really like to think about. We have a limited number of years of topsoil left. We have superstorms. I mean, I was on a phone call today with someone who was saying, like, what the heck is going to be the ramification on our agriculture system with these superstorms in Texas, right? There's a lot of produce that's frozen right now. There are a lot of animals that are going to be dying right now. So it just, to me, was blatant. It was staring me in the face. And it was like, well, this topic of human needs driving food trends will just be meaningless unless we take this same concept and apply it to the climate crisis. And so now this is what I work on every day is my nonprofit, Food for Climate League. And really, what I'm so passionate about is the fact that food culture in so many ways is already leaning in the right direction. It's already leaning in the more sustainable direction, right? We were just talking about the rise of plant-based and people kind of starting to reckon with factory farms. We were talking with people becoming more engaged with sourdough, learning to cook, building these new skill sets, wanting to grow and cultivate things. There's this like really beautiful relationship in that, what the relationship that we could have with food that is best for us physically, best for us emotionally, is also what's good for the climate. And that story to me is not being told in the right way. I think a lot of the ways that we talk about food and sustainability these days is very elitist, it's very exclusionary. It makes us feel like we're giving something up in order for the greater good. The reality is there are so many ridiculously delicious and beautiful things out there to be eating, that you're not going to feel like you're giving something up if we address this the right way. So anyhow, that was why I ended there. And I think for many people, it was, I've actually heard that was the most impactful chapter. So I'm happy that I ended it there.
Yeah, definitely. I think it ended on a really good note, I would say. I remember, I think the ending was like, go outside, connect with nature. I think that was just...
Don't tell people, Sam.
Oh, shoot, I'm sorry. I spoiled the ending.
Well, no.
Yeah, sorry. That was definitely not the last
you can jump around to whatever chapter interests you.
Yeah. But anyway, Eve, has been a delight talking with you. And thank you so much for coming in to our electronic space. And I'm going to turn the mic over to Jamie, who is monitoring the chat. And let's see if we have some audience questions.
Yes, we do. Thank you, guys. That was an awesome conversation. And I hope everyone checks out Eve's book. We do have it on Hoopla. If you're not into the ebooks, please purchase it for Eve. And I'm hungry now. I don't know about everybody else, but so we do have a couple questions here in the chat. Steve is asking, let's see. I started to learn that phosphorus we feed plants is a rare commodity that we mine and then is wasted. I've heard that we could collect phosphorus in compost in human waste products. Are people in the food business talking about this issue from what you know?
I know nothing about phosphorus. That's fascinating. There are many backwards things that we do, and there are many uses for compost. I will tell you that I once read an interview with Prince Charles. He would like to run all of the UK on human poop. Totally possible to do. I think it's more a PR issue than anything else. So I don't know anything about phosphorus, but I'll be looking into it now.
I do know that there is like the Conservation Society in Kansas City. The energy from the human waste is actually, that's what lights up the building. So
yeah, I mean, listen, everything that we produce has a purpose. We're just not using it right now. There's a lot of different things that we've decided aren't valuable for some reason. Whether that's like cauliflower leaves, which by the way are delicious, or it's our human waste.
Yeah, people just don't want to think about it, I think.
Yeah.
Richard would like to know, what did you find for other age groups besides the millennials?
Yeah, good question. So my research had been focused on millennials specifically for a really long time. And then after my first book, I had the wonderful opportunity to travel around the world and talk to audiences all over. And I would very frequently see people, Gen Xers, baby boomers raising their hands saying, these things you're talking about, like you're talking about me. And what I began to realize is the behaviors that I have been researching are directly tied to the digital age. And so really what I'm researching is people who are connected to tech. And while that impact, the impact of the digital age is stronger with millennials and Gen Zers, there are plenty of Gen Xers and baby boomers who are on their email all day, who are on Twitter, who are getting text messages, who are dealing with the exact same stressors that that many young people are. There's also, by the same token, plenty of millennials and Gen Zers who have like no idea that Kim Kardashian is married to Kanye West, who have no interest in any of these things, who are spending their time by and large outdoors. And to me, like that's really where the divide comes from. It really isn't millennials versus the other generations. It's how is life in the digital age impacting well-being? And that's really where the divide comes from. Who's connected and who's not.
And let's see, we have another question. As we move away from empty social media and toward tangible hobbies and jobs, i.e. baking, do you think social media will fade away?
It's a good question. And tangible jobs are picking up steam. There's like a rising number of people who want to be barbers and plumbers, and bicycle repair people is like really popular. Windmill repair, which makes more sense as well. At this point, I don't think that social media is going to go away. What I do think will happen is I think the way that we use social media is going to inevitably change.
Mhm.
And I think we've all seen how destructive social media can be, emotionally, but also societally. I mean, but there are uses for it. And, one of the most interesting parts of the research that I was doing is that social media improves well-being in one instance that I was able to identify. That's not true, too. There's two instances. One is if you can find a community online that you wouldn't otherwise be able to find in real life. So like people who have a rare disease and find a community that can support them online, that improves your well-being. The only other studies that I found that indicate that social media improves well-being were those that saw that people who use social media in order to coordinate an offline engagement found higher well-being.
Mhm.
So it wasn't there to substitute for your in-person experience. It was there to facilitate your in-person experience. So I think our relationship with social media will shift, hopefully. And I do think that we are very much so as a society going to really revert back to many of our former ways of living. I think we're inevitably going to be closer to nature, and that might be intermixed with technology. But I'm really, really hopeful that the way that we live on social media, the performative way that we live, the very cult-like way that we live online, and the algorithms that we are a part of, I'm really hoping that that does change.
Mhm. I'm kind of wondering if we're going to it's going to become like the new roaring 20s for us. Everyone is just going to be like ready to get out and be with people again. So,
I mean, so it's like, yes, and I do think that's a possibility. I also think that we are all very, very, very addicted to these devices.
yeah.
So I do think you're probably going to see a rising number of people who are coping with the recognition of that addiction.
Mhm. Yeah. Karen is asking, what do you think of community supported agriculture versus large farms?
Yeah, so the rise in CSAs this year has been great. The Google searches for local farms was up by 400% at the start of the pandemic, and this is that particular number is U.S. specific, but the trend is worldwide. A lot of people realizing again, thinking about the fact that their food that they eat, what sustains them, is reliant on so many different factors that a lot of people are like, I want to meet my farmer, know where my food's coming from, maybe even grow it myself. And I think that having a relationship with the farmers near you is important and rewarding on a multitude of levels. Unfortunately, it's often a price issue for a lot of people, but that's not always the case. There are farms that have affordable, accessible food options. But knowing where your food comes from, knowing the people who grew your food actually makes your food taste better. There's a lot of really interesting studies around that. You can cultivate a relationship with those individuals. You can discover new foods. There's crazy things that grow in different regions and different soil types that don't grow everywhere else. There's all of these special things right around you that you probably don't even know about. So it's really an opportunity to be a culinary explorer, and then also to support a family who you might get to know. And also, by the way, you're going to waste less food because things are going to last like 5 times as long in your fridge.
That's true, and it doesn't have to travel so far.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. I know I was amazed after gardening this past summer. Like, why aren't my tomatoes going bad? Like, why are they lasting for? Oh, right, I just picked them, and they haven't had to travel from like California. Yeah.
And this is not to say that I think about the entire world's gonna subsist on local farms. I think at this point our population numbers honestly have surpassed that possibility because our population grew because of factory farming. So I think that there is going to be some form of industrialized food, but I think that kind of food system is going to move indoors, and I think it's going to be largely plant-based.
Let's see. SR is asking, what's your non-climate friendly food guilty pleasure?
My non-climate friendly food guilty pleasure. I would say, oh man, there's always like a oh, I know what it is. Like sour candies.
Oh.
I was gonna say a steak, but like the truth is that like I generally like if I'm gonna have a guilty pleasure steak, like I want a regeneratively grass-fed grazed steak because it tastes better. And if I'm gonna spend the money on it, then that's what I want to be eating. But like no, guilty pleasure is like the sour candies that are made with corn syrup. And corn is a monoculture that is not helping the climate in any way possible. So I would say that that's like my number one non-climate friendly indulgence.
That's fair.
Yeah.
And someone is asking, Eve, why are you not a vegan?
A vegetarian's a friend.
Okay. I figured.
I can tell you, Sharon, why I'm not a vegan, but I don't know how many people would be interested in this. But I do think that animals are a vital part of a sustainable food culture. So we actually do need more people to be vegans, but we don't need the world to be vegan. We actually need people to instead eat meat once a month or a few times a year, and pay farmers way more money for better quality meat. So if you're actually looking at how you develop a regenerative agriculture system, animals have to be a part of that system. So I think it would be a shame if those animals went to waste. So I do think that we need to be paying farmers to raise their livestock along in harmony with other crops in such a way that we are returning carbon to the soil, that we are creating habitats for a biodiversity of insects and animals and plants. Animals, livestock are just a part of that system. So I do think that it's important that we maintain some kind of animal-based food system. That said, I think that if you can go vegan, more power to you.
That's right. All right. Well, it doesn't look like we have any more questions in the chat right now. This was great. So informative. You're just a wealth of knowledge. I'm excited to check out your book for sure. Sam's been talking about it for a long time already. So
thank you, Sam.
This is his advanced reader copy. I'm going to share my screen really quick just to let everybody know about a couple programs that we have coming up. And
thanks, everybody.
Thank you. This was awesome. So coming up on February 23rd, let's see if I can enlarge that a little bit. Chair yoga and meditation. We might all be needing this a little bit this time of year. We're actually continuing this series throughout the spring. So this will be kind of like the first one. It'll be once a month, but you can sign up for one. You can sign up for two. It's up to you. And then the Long Shadow virtual screening, live director Q&A. You actually watch the movie beforehand and then come to the program and ask a question, the director. So that should be really fun. That's a collaboration with the Deerfield Library and about 30 other libraries. So that's really an exciting opportunity for us. So, all right, well, thank you again and keep in touch. Hopefully we can bring you in for an in-person program one day.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Thank
Have
you,
a good night.
everyone.